Well, I trust you guys are doing well. My name is Jeff Fuller. Jay Fuller Interviews is where you can find this interview and others. Certainly subscribe on YouTube at Jay Fuller Interviews. Also on Instagram and Twitter as Jay Fuller Interviews. Encourage you to join the Facebook group, Jay Fuller Interviews. I'm also the pastor at Living Hope Wesleyan Church. You can find more information there at Living Hope Wesleyan Church. We believe people's stories make our stories much better, less ignorant, and certainly more impactful. And we have a great story for you today. This is Darryl Rodgers. Darryl, how are you?
Doing great. Hope you're doing well.
We're doing well. It's a little chilly. We're up here in Vermont, and it was 32 degrees this morning. So,
oh, wow.
And my wife, she likes to see how long we can go until we turn on the heat. And so we'll see what happens. But the sun's out now, and we're ready to go. But Darryl, I noticed on your Facebook page that you've been working out. You bench pressed 300 pounds the other day. What brought on this motivation?
Well, I've been kind of a gym rat pretty much most of my life. And, there's been a few stretches of a year or two where I wasn't as active in the gym. But so I have a 20-year-old, just turned 20, who's junior in college, and he just went back to college, but he plays, he's on the football team there in college and runs track. And so he was my workout partner over the summer. He was here, and we were kind of motivating each other. We set up a home gym in our carport, and I had him here. It was just so convenient. And back when I was in my 20s, I was doing a little bit of bodybuilding, amateur bodybuilding and powerlifting and stuff. But the most I had ever bench pressed was about 265. I was never real strong upper body. It was more, I could do better with squats and deadlifts. But, I've had some limitations now. I'm 59 years old. Almost 59. So I've got some limitations with my legs now. Don't let me do everything that I used to be able to do, but I can still bench press. So we were really working on our bench presses this summer, and it just kept getting better and getting better. And so I said, I'm going to go for 300 pounds, and we made it. I made it. So.
And how much do you weigh? Or did you weigh when you put that up?
I'm about 195. 190, 195. And, really, I've got a goal. I want to lose about 10 pounds. And I've been there not too long ago, but with COVID, I've been working out and lifting, but I haven't been doing a lot of as much cardio as I usually do. So I need to thin out just a little bit here.
Yeah, I'm in a similar situation. My son is a freshman out in Michigan, living with my brother-in-law and his family. But he's been working out, and I was working out last year, but now my son is getting bigger and stronger, and I'm 45, so I'm like, I need to get back at it. But my goal also is to get 315, because I think there's something about 345-pound plates on each side that looks really good. So I tried it once, I got stuck, and now I'm back a few months. So we're going to see what happens.
That's my ultimate goal, is to get there. I'd like to be able to do that. So I'm going to make another run at it. He's back in college now, and I'll take a little bit of a break, but I'm going to make another run at it. So maybe by next summer I can hit 315.
So we're going to turn the conversation serious pretty quick. But you had two sons, and behind me is a picture of you speaking at a school assembly. And you're speaking because your son Chase passed away, and you've written a book. It's called A Life Half Lived, that you guys can find on Amazon. I certainly encourage you to get a copy of that book, A Life Half Lived. But could you just share, Darryl, about what took place and when you lost Chase?
Yeah. So, Chase had, he was always a good kid growing up. He was diagnosed ADD, ADHD. I would say it was a milder case compared to a lot of kids that I've seen come in contact with over the years. But he did struggle a little bit with attention in the classroom, focus in the classroom. But, no kind of real behavior problems, nothing like that. But in about the 10th grade, I began to see a difference in in his behavior, and it happened suddenly. And he was my first teenager, so at first I thought, well, this is just a phase he's going through. This is just what happens with teenage boys, sometimes. But he was becoming a little bit. There's a lot of different things that were going on all at once, but he was becoming sort of rebellious at home, and it was just out of character for him, the way he was behaving. And suddenly his grades were dropping. And so I was really struggling with what to do about it. At the time, I did not know of any drug use. And according to what he told my wife, he never really shared with me on this part, but he did not use it. He was not using it at that point, according to him. But anyhow, I was just trying to get a handle on how to get his behavior back on track, and really getting concerned. Like, for the first time ever, he was failing. He was usually a B student, but now he was failing one of his classes. And so eventually he transferred, and I encouraged him to do that, to transfer to a military school that was about a 2-hour drive from our home. So he headed there, and that's when he got introduced. As far as I know, that was the first time he was really introduced to alcohol, and experimented with a couple of other things there. Had a really good, got back on track with his grades while he was there. Had a really good senior football season there. He wasn't a real big kid, but he ended up, he made a huge play in one game there that I love to tell a story about that. He ended up that game, he played the entire game on a broken foot, and we didn't know. And he made a big play at the end of the game in the fourth quarter with 1 minute left to play, put us in a position to win, and then we ended up winning the game in triple overtime. So it was a really, really, really cool moment. And the shoes, I think you can see them over my shoulder there. Those are the cleats that he wore in that game, the last time that I got to see him play a game of football. But he made first team all conference, honorable mention all state, despite the fact that he was small, and he was a cornerback, by the way, defensive back. And despite the fact that he was small, and he was, he only played 6 games that season because of his injury. But he got picked up by a school in Illinois. It was a small college, private school. They offered him some scholarship money to come play football there. And that's when the wheels really fell off. He began associating with a group of people who were abusing drugs and alcohol while he was there, and pretty quickly started with alcohol and then went to marijuana, and from there to other drugs, began experimenting with other drugs, and dropped out. Second semester of his freshman year, came back home, and immediately gravitated to a rough crowd here. At one point, he wouldn't follow the house rules, and I set some pretty simple rules. And he wasn't really looking for work. He would be gone for sometimes days at a time, and then just show back up at home, and just like expected to just waltz right in, like everything, like we shouldn't have any questions about anything. We didn't have any contact. I mean, we'd try to call him, try to text him, nothing. We'd get anything from him. And he pulled that stunt, several times. And then finally one day he came to the front door, and I didn't let him in. And that was really tough to do.
Let me interrupt you right here. I just want to backtrack a little bit. When you said he transferred high school and went to military school, was he still living at home, or was he at the school overnight?
Yeah, the military school was about a 2-hour drive from our home, and it was a boarding school, so he was staying there on the campus there.
How did you and your wife negotiate the fact that he was still underage, so to speak, but not in your care? Do you think that sense of independence made him feel older or more mature than he was, which led to maybe some of this erratic behavior later on?
That's a hard thing to say. I think, he was in a lot of ways, he was still really immature. And, um, I thought that would be good for him. I thought the structured environment, especially with the ADD struggles and the discipline, I thought that would be really good for him. But unfortunately, there were a lot of kids there. There were some kids there who were there for good reasons. That they wanted to, improve academically and go on to some of them to some of the service academies. Some really smart kids, but there were a lot of kids there who, were having similar struggles to him, and some a lot more struggles, and who were a bad influence. And I would say that Chase, while he was a really good athlete, he was he was more of a follower than a leader.
Sure.
So he was very easily influenced by people who are not making good decisions sometimes.
When he wanted to drop out of college, did he have a conversation with you and your wife, his mom, or is that something where?
Yeah, well, sort of. He came home freshman year. They redshirted him because he was small. They redshirted him, so he didn't get any playing time there. We went up for a couple of his games anyhow, and his grades weren't good. He just wasn't putting forth any effort. And when he came home at Christmas, I said, look, he was on academic probation. I said, Chase, you don't have to go back to school.
Yeah.
You can, I can help you. We'll help you find something else. You can go to trade school. There are a lot of different things you can do, or you can just go to work, but I'll help you. And I said, no, Dad, I want to go back. I want to go back. And so he did go back, and he wasn't there very long before he was getting in trouble. They kicked him out of school.
Yeah.
And he wanted me to just drive up and come pick him up. And my wife and I had a discussion about it, and we decided we would pay for a bus ticket for him to come home.
Yeah.
And there's a long story behind all of that, but he did make it home.
Well, Darryl, before we continue, I want to actually fast forward. Now that you're speaking at school assemblies and sharing your story you shared with our congregation a couple years ago, and just made an impact, appreciated that so much. When you see students, is it easier now for you to see the hurt in kids' eyes, or the pain of those that people put pressure on and think they're the star athlete or they're best in their class, that they should be a leader, but you could tell now that they are struggling like we all do?
Yeah, that's one of the things I've addressed a little bit with kids, that I've sort of done a listening, I don't know if you want to call it a listening campaign or what, but at some of the schools when I speak, I do it different ways depending on what the college or what the high school wants or middle school. And sometimes they will request that I come in and speak to a small class, like what's the helpful living class? Yeah. So, and I'll come in and I'll hit every helpful living class in that school over a 2-day period. And what I do is I decided I would start asking them questions to try to get feedback from them. And there's only 2 or 3 things. They'll give me 5 or 6 answers that I get consistently. Like, I ask them, why do teenagers sometimes decide to use drugs or start using drugs? But it really comes down to 2 or 3 answers that I get consistently. And that is really peer pressure. Peer pressure is probably the top one that I get. There's a couple of others, like things going on at home that they're trying to cope with. And it's usually that's what it comes down to, is a coping mechanism for other issues, emotional issues that they're dealing with. Or in a lot of cases there's an underlying confidence problem there. And so I do have a lot of empathy for that. I struggled with confidence a lot when I was a kid. And so one of the things I'd really like to do is try to find ways to help them build their confidence, get more confident.
And Darryl, you have penned the book "A Life Half Lived" about your son Chase, and if you could just pick up where you left off about that night your son came home and he was with a friend, could you just share with us?
Yeah. So he, I locked him out that day, and I kept up with him on social media, and it was not looking good. Just looking at the crowd he was hanging with, and kind of in hotel rooms, and he got a tattoo, got a couple, 2 or 3 tattoos, which was kind of unusual, I thought, and it just kind of went with the culture. It's not to say that everybody gets a tattoo or that tattoos are necessarily a bad thing, but it just kind of went along with the whole culture in this situation. And so I was just, noticing that and losing a lot of weight rapidly, and not a very big kid to begin with, kind of thin on the thin side, especially for a football player, but pale looking, glassy eyed in a lot of his photos. I became really alarmed. And so I started doing a little online research, decided we would have an intervention for him. And I called an intervention company, hired an interventionist to come to our house, and we had the intervention for him here at our home. And through that intervention, we were able to get him into treatment down in South Florida. He was in treatment there for 30 days, then out of that into a sober living home. Bounced around to quite a few different ones while he was there, stayed there for a total of about 9 months, and then came back home. And when he got back here, he was doing a lot better.
How old was Chase?
He was, when he passed away, Chase was 20.
And when he was in rehab, was that just before? Was he 19 when he went to rehab?
He was 19 when he went to rehab, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so he, he came back home, and like I said, he was doing a lot better. I felt like I had the old Chase back, He started looking for work. He was avoiding some of the people who'd been a bad influence. He wasn't using any drugs, and he was going to IOP, intensive outpatient care, 2 nights a week. He did get work. And things were kind of headed in a good direction, and then he began to relapse. There's a long story behind, kind of what I feel like led up to that. I feel a little bit responsible on that. When I say that, I mean, I didn't have all the information that I do now about addiction, and didn't really understand my role and what I could do to make things better, or to maybe kind of get him headed in a better direction. And that's one of the things that I do now is I've been working with parents who have addicted children 1 night a week, facilitating a peer support group for them. And I've learned a lot through that. So I've been doing that for a little over a year now. It's a Christian faith-based organization. It's PAL, Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. But anyhow, so Chase went, he relapsed, and he, I could kind of see it. I could kind of sense it coming. He came to me one day and he said, "Dad, I'm headed in a bad direction again. I'm hanging around a bad crowd. I know I need to get away from these people. I don't know exactly how to do that." And he said, "I've decided I'm going to go back to Florida. I'm going to move back to Florida, to the area where I was in treatment." Told me when he was planning to leave. And so I told my wife, Kim, and Kim made Chase promise that he would come by and have a meal with us before leaving for Florida. And the day that he was supposed to come by and eat with us, it was getting late in the afternoon. It was May the 29th, 2014. We hadn't heard anything from him. We're trying to call him. We're trying to text him. We're getting no response. And so where Kim's beginning to get a little upset, because she feels like Chase has probably left for Florida without even coming by to say goodbye. And I had a phone call from a friend of mine about that time. So I go out in the front lawn to have my phone conversations. I wouldn't disturb my wife and Justin, who were in the living room watching TV. Justin was our younger son, who was in the 8th grade at the time. And so I was out in the front lawn talking to my friend on the cell phone when a police cruiser pulled up to the curb in front of our house. And I knew something wasn't right. He got out of his car, started up my driveway, and I hung up on my phone conversation and went to meet that officer there in the driveway. And that's where he told me that Chase had been in a bad wreck and that he had died at the scene. And so, that's one of those things that I don't even know how to describe to someone how, you feel in a moment like that when you learn that your child has died in a wreck. It's there was just a long pause. Didn't want to really believe what I was hearing, and I began to ask questions like, just in my mind, I don't think I really said anything for a long time, but in my mind, I'm thinking, he said he was in a wreck, but he's okay, or he's in some kind of trouble. It was like my mind was playing tricks on me, but I finally looked at him and I said, he's dead. And he just kind of dropped his head and he said, yes, sir. And he asked me if there was someone inside that he could go notify. And I said, well, my wife and my son are in there, but I felt like it was my job to tell him. So I said, let me do that. And he said, how about if I go in with you? And so he came in the door right behind me. I would go in, I walk in the door, and there's Kim in the recliner immediately to my right. As I come in the door, Justin's back on the sofa, and I made eye contact with Kim, and you could see, when that officer walked in the door right behind me, that you could just see the expression on her face change, to one of terror. She knew it was bad, whatever it was. And so I just had to come out and tell her. And Justin, of course, we all cried for a long time. Took a while to get settled down, and then began to ask the officer questions. And he didn't have a lot of answers that day, but over the next several weeks, we found out that Chase and some of his friends had been to a park near home. They all smoked marijuana together there in the park. And then Chase it was his car that they were driving. And so he allowed this young lady to get behind the wheel of his car. She had smoked with them there in the park. She was 18, really pretty girl that he had dated at one time, but they were no longer seeing each other. So we were kind of surprised they were there together. Not really sure what all was behind that story today, but he let her get behind the wheel, and he got in the front passenger seat of his own car. Another young man got in the back. They left that park and they drove out, just a couple of miles, stopped to get something to eat, got right onto I-40, headed eastbound, and she lost control of Chase's car in a curb, right in the middle of rush hour traffic, about 4:45 p.m. that day. And the car spun out of control, left the road, struck a tree, and kind of wrapped around the tree. Chase was killed instantly. It took firefighters and emergency personnel almost an hour to get the three of them out of the vehicle.
And I just wanted to share, and here's a picture behind me. I know that must be difficult to see, but thank you so much for sharing. And thank you for sharing at our church. Our congregation actually had experienced a loss. My cousin was killed in Iraq in 2005. And when you spoke, it had been about 12 or 13 years since that happened, but his dad was in the congregation and was just overwhelmed how you had the courage to tell the story because you thought people could learn from it. And as my cousin's parents were informed of his passing, it was just so difficult to hear, and just seeing just being notified, just knowing that sinking feeling and wanting not to believe it was true. But I just applaud you so much for sharing now that people can be aware. And so I'm going to move off this picture, but it's just remarkable how so much can happen in just a short period of time. But
it really is. And that happens so fast, and I can empathize now so much differently and so much better than I could before with people who are going through grief. So that, I really get that. You showed the car there. there's a part of the story that I probably didn't tell when I was at your church, but that was my dad's car, and he had left it in a handwritten note. He was a Southern Baptist preacher. My mother had written a note to Chase was to get the car, and my dad's Bible with one of his Bibles with his sermon notes was still in the trunk of the car when I went to it. But just kind of ironic, you know.
Could you just share what happened to the driver and the other passenger in that vehicle?
Yeah. So, you know, she was charged with, I think, I'm trying to remember now the charges. I think it's vehicular manslaughter, but it was, you know, those charges were pending, you know, the outcome of the toxicology reports, all of that. It's a very, very difficult thing to prove impairment via marijuana. It just doesn't act the same way in the body that alcohol does, and that gets pretty complicated. So I won't go into all of that right now, but and all the science behind it. But she, the driver, you know, 7 months after the wreck and just a few weeks prior to what would have been her first court appearance, died after a fire broke out in her apartment. The fire chief says that based on their investigation, he believes that she poured gasoline all over the floor, stood in the middle of it, and ignited it. Wow. The resulting fire, I think, burned down something like 11 or 12 apartment units. Fortunately, nobody else was hurt. But she died from her burns the next day in the hospital. The backseat passenger was a young man. I want to say he was about, I think he was 18. He was probably about 18 at the time, 17 or 18. But I went to visit him in the hospital, you know, before the driver took her own life. And, you know, that was kind of I spent some time with him and just praying for him and trying to get to know him better. Long story there, you know, and I really haven't kept up with him lately. I just, I don't get the sense that he's really kept going in or changed his direction in life. Let's put it that way, unfortunately.
So, Darryl, I have a very difficult question, but I feel as though I have to ask. As a dad, I would be struggling with that. When the driver of the vehicle, you found out that she had passed, what did you feel? Was it some sort of, what did you feel?
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because that's one of those things that I didn't talk a lot about, you know, early on. And my wife and I were having this discussion recently, and I actually got a phone call from another acquaintance of Chase's. That was a kid that I had taken in for a while after Chase died. I took him into our home, and he had a drug problem. I paid for him to go to treatment, and it didn't last long. He was there for about a week, but and eventually I ended up putting him out of my house because I found drugs on him. But I was just trying to help him. I really was trying to help him, but it's one of those things where he just wasn't ready for the help. And anyhow, he called me and told me about the driver's death. And when he called me, it was just, honestly, I didn't feel anything. I just have to be honest about that. I really didn't feel anything. I was very angry at the time. I was angry when I wrote this book. I was angry, and you can see the anger it kind of comes out in the writing that I was angry at a lot of things. I was angry at myself. I never really was angry at God. You know, I hear people who go through things like this talk about getting angry at God. I was never angry with God. I was angry at myself. I was angry, like, you know, how did I fail Chase as a parent? I was angry with the people who I felt like had been a bad influence on Chase. Of course, you know, I think it's human nature. I didn't, you know, I really wasn't angry with Chase so much. I think my wife was, but I really wasn't angry with him so much. But I do realize that it was, number one, it was his car. he was the oldest one out of the group. It was his decisions really that were probably more responsible for his death than anyone else's. But I felt like, I knew that the legal system was not going to hold her responsible. And she never said, oh, I'm sorry for what I did. And, or sorry for the role that I played, in Chase's death. And there was never any kind of, a meeting of the minds between she and I. And I kind of regret that now. I really do. I wish that, I think the legal system sort of makes it difficult for that to happen a little bit, because I'm sure she was being probably advised by her lawyers not to talk to me. And I sort of instinctively knew that, from a legal perspective, it probably wouldn't be a good idea for me to talk to her. But I think if we could have had that conversation, who knows, maybe things would have turned out differently. I don't know. We'll never know now.
Can you just share about your faith? You said you never were mad at God, but how have you grown since this happened? I hear people frequently sharing on the radio about how they would not change things from their past because they've gotten closer to God. I can only imagine that losing a son, you would change that. But how have you grown?
Yeah, I think as a parent, certainly I've learned in hindsight, looking back, some people will sort of scold me, when I go down that path. You don't need to beat yourself up. No, I'm not beating myself up. I'm past that. But I think it's really important for me to be able to reflect and go, what could I have done better? And how can I pass those lessons on to other parents? And I think certainly I could have been a lot more. I was very much I have a military background. So I was pretty strict and kind of a disciplinarian, in a lot of respects. And I think I could have been more approachable, because if Chase had a problem, he wouldn't come to me. He would go to his mom, because he was afraid of how I would react. So yeah, I definitely could have been better with that. And then once the addiction took place, I didn't have the information that I really needed at the time. I didn't understand my role as a parent.
Sure.
But certainly I could have handled all of that a lot better. And I think it could have made a difference for sure. But all of it has made me stronger as a person. Yeah. It's increased my faith in so many ways. Things that used to ruffle my feathers or get me down, it just doesn't. It just bounces off of me now,
How was your relationship with Justin?
It's good. It was a little bit touch and go there for a little while after Chase died. We went through some phases, and now I will take all the blame for that. But I think, we're both struggling with Chase's death. He's still a teenager, and I still had not learned some of the lessons that I needed to learn about parenting. And so over time, I learned that, especially once your kids are getting to the teenage years, you have to learn how to let go and let them make their own mistakes, and sometimes keep your mouth shut when you really want to say something. And I've gotten a lot better about that. And now the things have sort of flipped, because instead of me saying, Justin, you should do this, or you should do that, or why didn't you do this or that, or you should do it this way, I sit back, and then he comes to me and asks me for advice. And that's huge for me. It's flattering when he comes to Dad. He's 20 years old and asks Dad for advice on things.
That's so good. That is so good. The name of the book is Of Life Half Lived. You can find that on Amazon, Amazon.com. And Darryl, I just want to talk to you a little bit about the book. What prompted you to write the book? Was it that anger you need to express? Was it you felt other people needed to hear the story? Were you approached by someone to write the book? How did that all come about?
Nope, didn't have a coach. And the first thing I've ever published that I wrote, and certainly I can look at it now and go, oh, I could have done this better, that better. But I think it's great the way it is. And the reason I know that is that, God obviously had a hand in it being written the way it was, because I made it free for people to download. I still get people who want a paperback version. But it's never been about making money. Because it's free on Kindle, it gets downloaded all over the place. And I have this kid now who's 18 years old in Guyana who messages me almost every day. His dad died several years ago, and it didn't end on, he didn't have the best of relationships with his dad. So he and I can talk, and it's good for both of us, really. And so I've made connections with people really all over the world. I had a couple from Scotland who came here and stayed with us for 3 days, who lost a son to heroin overdose. So the book has just been tremendous in how many people it's reached. I get somewhere around, it varies, but somewhere around 20 to 25 downloads a day, every single day almost. And then every now and then I get this weird 5,000 downloads in a day spike that I have no idea where that's coming from, but it's great. So I think I got off track on your question a little bit there about the book, but yeah, I didn't have any coaching. It was, I needed to express all of my emotions, and looking back now, I think, I would say I was kind of selfish, because I really wasn't thinking about what my wife was going through. And she wasn't really, and I think a lot of ladies do this, but she wasn't telling me what she was going through, what she was feeling. I didn't realize how severe her grief was at the time. And she went to Grief Share, which is a Christian program that a lot of churches have. And she went through it twice, and she went by herself. In the meantime, I was sitting here just pounding away at the keyboard, and that was my therapy, if you will.
Yeah.
And then after that, I spent almost the next year making a short film that's 23 minutes long about Chase's life, sort of a documentary style. And so, I sat here when I wrote the book and when I made the film with just tears running down my cheeks. And it was the way that I dealt with the grief.
Well, Darryl, I appreciate so much that you would just share this with us. And I've had a couple good friends pass away. One was of an overdose on heroin. Another one was a bad batch of heroin, and he had been clean 2 years. He told me he was the cleanest he had ever been in 2 years since coming to our church and not being in prison. He said you get pretty clean in prison, but he met a girl and just led down that way. For a while, I've talked to my coach about it, how not survivor's guilt in that way, but I just wondered why he didn't come to me when he was struggling. And how have you processed that? What advice would you tell to me or to others that were just saying, we are here, we're available, but sometimes we're just ignorant? And you've shared a lot during this interview, how you've learned so much and you're learning how to apply it. And your son, Justin, is coming to you now for advice. And it's lessons, man. I wish I could speed up learning, but sometimes it just takes time because that's how things are. What advice would you give to me and others?
That's so difficult. Addiction is such a, sometimes we try to simplify it with little catchphrases and things, I think, as a society, but it is so complex from the standpoint that there's so many different factors that weigh into it. Genetics, environment, when a person is coming up, and just a lot of it. Sometimes there can be trauma involved, but not always necessarily. So it's hard to know unless somebody's really, really open with you what the underlying causes are. And sometimes they don't even know themselves.
Right.
And so, I mean, as a parent, I mean, in terms of parents, and I know this is not, it doesn't directly apply to what you're talking about, but as a parent, you know, like I said, we have to learn to let go. I think parents, once a child is addicted, they become stuck emotionally at the age that they were at when they started using, or somewhere close to that. So you end up with a 25-year-old who emotionally behaves or thinks much more like a 15-year-old.
Right.
And that creates a barrier in adult to adult relationships. So understanding that, I think, you know, for someone like you, would help you understand how, you know, when someone that is in an adult body doesn't respond to you the way that most adults would, maybe you have a little better understanding now of where, you know, what's causing it, where that's coming from. But parents have to learn to back off, and that's a hard thing for parents, because there's this fear that grips them.
Yeah.
That is saying, if I don't help my child through this situation, they're going to die. And yeah, they could die, but until you stop enabling them, and sometimes that means letting them stay in your house. If you got a 25-year-old living in your house, you're probably enabling them, you know. And it's a hard thing to tell parents, but they've got to learn to back off and stop that enabling behavior, and allow that child to learn from the pain of their own choices.
Well, Darryl, thank you so much for making the time. And that's great advice, wise advice, difficult, but, and I think that's why being a Christian, it's so positive, because God is big enough. And if people would respond in obedience to God, then he's going to bring Christians into people's lives and give us opportunity to see truth and hope and make changes. And it's just exciting to hear how God's been with you, but brought you through and continues to lead you to provide your story to help others in their story. So, Darryl, thank you so much. I just want to get you out on this, and that's you and your wife. So my wife and I, we joke that I am perfectly comfortable. I kind of enjoy being in front of a camera or a microphone. And we just wondered, because her mom passed away the summer we got married, that maybe God would have us share more of that story. But my wife at this point still does not feel that is what God wants for her. With your wife, do you feel like you both are sharing? How are you both sharing, whether together or individually, just to provide light on some of these situations that families are going through?
She's not as out there as I am. You know, she supports me and supports what I'm doing, and but she does help people more on a one-on-one basis as needed. She came to one event that I did here locally and spoke up, you know, when we had a Q&A session, and had some things to say that I was really kind of surprised, you know, that she would speak out like that. But definitely, you know, ladies who are struggling with grief, who have lost a child, things like that. Just recently, she was able to talk with ladies. So, you know, that's kind of her area. And when I say that's her area, she's more of that, you know, one-on-one type of person. And I do pretty good with that too, but she's going to lean more towards that and away from, you know, being out in front and doing a lot of public speaking, like I'm doing probably. So just a little difference in personality there. But yeah, I would, you know, when she's ready, I would encourage her to find ways to be able to use her story to help other people, because there's so much healing and strength that can come from that.
Well, Darryl, thank you so much. Again, the name of the book is A Life Half Lived, free on Kindle, Amazon.com. You can find it there, A Life Half Lived. And Darryl, I'm just going to ask you to do me a favor. I rarely do this, but would you just pray for us, but those listening, those going through these difficult times? I just think a prayer from you would be very meaningful.
Absolutely. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this opportunity today that Pastor Jeff and I can come here together. Thank you for this technology that has made this available, and that we can use this to reach other people with your message. Father, I know that there are people out there struggling right now, families. I know there are people struggling with addiction, and not just the addict, but also the whole family. And right now, with everything we have going on with COVID and lockdown, I know it's more difficult than ever because people don't have access to their normal groups that they go to for just for counseling and just the peer support groups and things like that. So, Father, just pray that you would give people strength, that you would direct them to the right resources. Put a desire in the hearts of those who are struggling with addiction to find you if they don't already know you, and if they do, to deepen and strengthen that relationship. Please, Father, just give the parents and the family members strength to deal with these issues and wisdom, and send them to the right places to get information. In Jesus' name I ask it. Amen.
Amen. Darryl, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great being with you. Good to see you again.
Again, that's Darryl Rodgers. The name of the book is A Life Half Lived. My name is Jeff Fuller. I'm the pastor at Living Hope Wesleyan Church, and we certainly hope that if you are in need or know someone of need, that you just reach out, let us know. We just want to be God's hands and feet. We aren't here to judge, but we are here to pray and lift up and just share that God is for you and he loves us so much. With that, I'm out for town. We'll talk to you all soon. Thanks again.